Ayaka, and hi Eva. And I'm a consultant with LSAT Unplugged, and I run the admissions classes every week here on Wednesdays. So thank you for joining. I know it's late for some people. For the last month, at least a month of January and the first week of February, we have been doing some essay reading classes. Hi, Sam. We've gotten some great essays here. And first off, today I do want to do a little bit of a chit chat with you guys around drafting your essays. Not just because, we've been reading essays all last month, but because, we can't get through all the essays here in class, and I don't want people waiting for their essay to be read to make their next draft. So I do want to give some tips and tricks on how to kind of write your next draft and how to move your essay forward without having someone, maybe you're waiting for other people to read your essay, maybe you're waiting for feedback. Even in those moments, you can kind of move that essay forward. So I just do want to give you some tips and tricks to do that. And then if we have time, we'll go into the essays that were turned in. I know, Sam, I have your essay. Clint, I have your essay as well. Eva, I'm not sure I see your essay, but please let me know if you did send in one, and we can try to get it in today as well. We do have a jam-packed schedule, so I'm going to get started. Let me share my screen. Here we go. Share. Can everyone see that? Good. All right, perfect. Thank you, Eva. So really, we're talking about draft management and how to push that essay forward, right? We write that first draft, we write that second draft, and then you're like, okay, what do I do? And some of the things that we point out here in class, and those of you, Clint, you've been here for a few weeks kind of continuously, and you might be hearing the same feedback or similar feedback to different people, right? So, what we are looking at, when we are looking at multiple essays, we can kind of identify similar mistakes or similar trends that people fall into while writing their essays. So we want to pick those up. And these are not easy fixes, and they're not kind of like, one and done fixes, but they can help you rethink your essay a little bit more and kind of move that essay forward a little bit further than, waiting 2-3 weeks to get feedback. Sam, I'm reading your chat right now. I would not want to go through it tonight. Okay, perfect. Feel free to send in another draft if you have another one, in the works, and we'll take a look next week. Next week, we will do a whole session dedicated to reading essays. So, it might be a good time to turn that in. Alrighty, so here we go. So draft management. This is kind of the pretty obvious piece about this class. How do you organize and keep track of all your drafts? So I don't know about you, but I am someone who uses the magic of technology and uses the duplicate button all the time. So I have about 15 drafts of my personal statement, for example. And it, usually when I'm writing something, it goes up to 20-30 drafts, not because I'm making huge changes one draft to another. It's, the first couple drafts is going to be big changes, and, you might want to keep track of side ideas that you had. But as you go forward, you're changing these minute details, taking a line out here or taking a word and changing it around, see how a different wording might sound or a different structure might sound. So you really do want to keep track of all versions of your essay, not because, they're all, that may be the one that you're turning in, but you want to track your thought process there. Sometimes for personal statements, diversity statements, optional essays, they may be asking for different things. So you may need to reorder your essay. You may need to think about what your opening line is or what your conclusion is, right? So they may be looking for different things. They may be asking for different things. The prompt may be a little bit different for each school. So you really want to pay attention to what's going on in the prompt, and then look at your draft and say, okay, what needs to get changed, right? The ideal situation is that your personal statement does not change too much from school to school, and it shouldn't, except for these very small cases, and also those schools that you're like, this is my ride or die top choice. Or maybe it's your reach school, and you want to put some extra detail in it. I think that would be, a separate draft than your regular personal statement draft. So, really, you want to keep track of all versions. You never know what may come in handy. And when you look back at a draft, you might say, hey, that's something that I said in one draft, it got dropped in another, and you may want to revisit. So really, the essay is allowed to change over the course of, multiple drafts. The essay should change over the course of multiple drafts. But you really want to keep track of all those changes, because you never know when one of those changes might come in handy. How to successfully manage the drafts. So usually it's either dating them. So what I like to do is go into, this is kind of a Google Doc feature, but, go into file, and I believe you can make a copy, right? And then it'll say like copy of blah, 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 edit the name of the file and put a date behind it. I used to put a number behind it because I would do multiple drafts in a day. But I found recently that dating it might be a little bit better for me. So either dating it or adding a number behind it to know which draft is the most recent can really help you in keeping track of progress in your draft. I really would not rely on stuff like when it was last edited, because sometimes, when you're looking at a past draft and you like accidentally add a space to it, or you might be clicking around and you might change something, it'll update when that date was that it was edited. So really actually putting it in the title really does help and is easy to track where you are in your drafting journey. So that's kind of the draft management piece. And that should be pretty straightforward, but any questions there? We good? All right, sounds good. All right, so moving on, pushing your essay forward. So I think there's two tracks, and I think many of us here are looking for feedback, people to read your essay, people to give, thoughts and opinions about your essay. So I think you're in the great spot in terms of finding your editing circle, right? And I hope there are other people outside of us in this room reading your essay or looking at it and giving you some kind of opinion on your essay. We'll go into editing circles a little bit more. But the first piece, the self-editing checklist. So this is really the kind of big pieces of feedback that we give here in class that are common amongst, many essays. And it's not that it's wrong, it's just we want to make sure that the essay matches the greatness of who you are. And sometimes these things can, we think it's going well, but we really want to kind of look out for these things to make sure that the essay matches who you are and can sound like you, is trying to get the message across in the right way, all of those things. So we'll go into that first. So first, the self-editing checklist. Many times in our opening lines, or when we're telling a story, we tend to go into we statements. This is a personal statement, so the majority of times we're talking about yourself and your experience. So it should be an I statement essay. You're going to have a lot of I statements in your personal statement, diversity statement included. So I do think that going in and doing the control find for all the words we, and looking at what you're saying there, and making sure that you're not making these broad general statements. When I say broad general statements, it can be something like, something like, we all have dreams and hopes and all of that, right? Like something like that, where it's very broad. It's not very convincing because it's so broad across so many things, that it just it means almost nothing. So, we really want to look for those statements in your essay and see if we can eliminate those. How can you tie it to yourself? So it's not a we statement anymore, it's an I statement, right? So instead of saying we all have hopes and dreams, you can say, I have a relentless pursuit for my dream, right? And that's a little bit more personal, that's a little bit more focused. And what I like to say is general statements put your message or puts your story out of focus because it's bringing in too much, whereas turning it into an I statement or focusing on your journey, that puts your story into focus and it gives a sharper image of what you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Great. Is your hook relevant? We talk about this all the time in this class. Is that first paragraph floating? We think about, whenever we think about, oh, I have to write a personal statement, we think about that hook in the very beginning and we're not thinking about the rest of the story. So then does that hook float? Does it matter? Does it come back in the story? Is it relevant to the story? So sometimes we are cutting that full first paragraph to say, hey, really, it's a great start, but you really don't need it in your essay. So think about whether it's relevant in your essay. Think about whether it's pertinent to what you're talking about. Does it come up in your conclusion? Think about all those things, because sometimes we're very attached to that hook because we think a personal essay needs to be catchy. We think it needs to have this interesting story behind it. And that's the interesting piece that's up there. Sometimes we're really attached to that story, which I totally get. We are attached to our personal stories. And unfortunately, you can only say so much in your personal statement that, you don't want to get rid of it. But sometimes when you look at the whole essay as a whole essay, you're saying, hey, that paragraph might not be relevant. Sam, good question here. How do we know if the narrative is changing rather than flowing? So when we talk about the hook in particular, some people start with, my grandfather came from this other country, blah, blah, blah. And then, you're talking about in my internship, blah, blah, blah. So, you're talking about two separate stories that don't relate to each other in a way that is matched up, right? You may be talking about, there was a girl a few weeks ago who had an essay about how, she's taking in this tradition of music from her grandfather, and she's now looking to go in. She went into the music industry and now looking to do entertainment law. I think that flows as a story. But if you're talking about, your grandfather came from here and then you got involved in some legal trouble and then now you want to help people, it's a little bit too hopping islands. So if that story doesn't add to the rest of the narrative, which, we talk about keeping that narrative very tight, we don't want to cross multiple jobs or multiple generations just for the sake of crossing generations. That's when it becomes a little bit like, oh, why is it there? And you'll see it happen, especially when you hear your essay read out loud. You're like, oh, I see how it floats. So, if you turn in your essay and you hear me read it out loud, you might, think like, oh, maybe that piece of my essay doesn't fit. It can happen in your conclusion as well, where it might not fit anymore. So it's where you started, and it's a good start always, in terms of a hook. But sometimes we grow out of that hook as we're writing multiple drafts. So, and we kind of tend to keep the hook throughout our drafts. And I don't really know why. I think it's an attachment, but also we've thought about it so much that we kind of tend to hold on to it. but I think 90% of the time we're cutting that hook, just because it doesn't relate to the story that we're telling, and it's become irrelevant as we've drafted more and more. So I hope that made sense. Thirdly, where does the why law school or legal career show up in your essay? So most of us have some sort of why law school or why a career change into legal or a legal career piece in your essay. Where does that come up? And I don't think, when I say this, it doesn't mean a direct answer to this question, but sort of this starting to tell that story of why law school or why a legal career should start at the latest mid essay, I think. More often than not, we see it come in the last two sentences of your conclusion of like, this is why I want to go to law school, blah, 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 which I don't want to say is wrong, but it's almost like you've told this beautiful story and it's like oh yeah, and this is also why I want to go to law school. It's kind of like this added or like a tacked on thing that you don't really want in your personal statement. You want it to be about why you're choosing this career. And most law schools will say you don't need it to write a great personal statement, which is true. We've seen a great number of essays that, don't have this particular topic in their essay. However, I do want you to keep in mind that you are applying to a professional school, and this is technically a professional piece of writing. So the purpose should be clear in terms of what you're trying to prove in this piece of writing. And I think for the majority of people, this is actually something important that needs to be included in their essay. So kind of take a look at where it's coming up. How much space does this explanation take up in your essay? Because it should be a significant amount of space that's being taken up. It should not be one line tacked on to the end. So those are the three big things that I think when we look at an essay, and these are like, if it's glaring, we have to call it out. Most first drafts come with these three issues, which are fixable, of course. So, it doesn't mean that, your essay is not good. It means that it just needs a little bit more work to get it into that final journey. So this is really that self-editing checklist that I would really pay attention to as you are starting to get other people to read your essay. After that first draft, we kind of give a big sigh and we give it out to other people. I would really wait and write a few drafts. Think about these three things after that first draft, and then maybe change a couple things in that first, second, third draft, and then have other people read it. Should the why law school career be around 2 to 3 sentences or a paragraph, or it depends? So I think the well done essays, it's kind of ingrained in that essay. I know I've seen essays where it comes up in the middle, right about the middle, and we're really coming back to that point, right? Okay, this is a realization I had. These are the actions I did. I still believe that law school is the right career choice for me, or the right choice for me to go into law school. So it kind of is ingrained in that last bottom half of the essay. So it's not really like 1 or 2 sentences. It's actually, over the course of 2 to 3 paragraphs that it's talking about why. There's other essays where they're saying, they'll say it in the very beginning and say, this is why I want to go to law school. And then they'll tell us the narrative, and then it'll come back to that in the last 2 paragraphs and kind of talk about, how that law career or law school is going to benefit the career, and what they can bring to that career, right? So I think when I hear 2 to 3 sentences, I feel like that's a little almost tacked on as well, of like, this is why I want to go to law school. It's like, it should be this moment of you saying like, it takes a lot to go to law school, right? It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of studying, it takes a lot of work in the LSAT. You have to write this essay, so why are you doing all of this? And I don't know if I've seen someone do it very well in 2 to 3 sentences, but I would love to see it if you have that. And maybe we can work on that. So I think it should be a little bit more robust in that explanation. But some people can do a lot of magic with very little words. So we shall see. Any questions here outside of you, Sam? I mean, Sam, you can ask more questions if you have any. Do you feel good? All right. All right, so editing circle. So this is like after you've gone through the self-editing checklist, and doesn't mean you can't have other people read your essay before you've gone through that checklist. You can have someone read your essay at any point. However, when you are actively looking for people to read your essay, think about, number one, who you're asking. You get a lot of people who say, oh, I had a lawyer read my personal statement. Well, if you think about it, lawyers are not professional personal statement readers, and they've written 1 or maybe 2 to get into law school. So I don't know if they're I don't want to say they're not the best judge, but they could be a good person to gauge your essay. But if you're looking for people to give really constructive and detailed feedback, lawyers are not writing in the way that your personal statement is written. They're writing in a different legal language. So that may be something to consider. Also, people who go to past students or students who are in law school now. I think what needs to be thought about is, I know somebody said, I had someone who is currently a Columbia Law School student read my essay. Great, that's amazing. And I'm sure you can get some great feedback. However, they're also not writing personal statements all the time. They're doing a different kind of reading and writing. So really think about who can give you constructive feedback. And I don't mean to say that you need to be doing this type of writing to be able to give feedback. But it's really easy to give your essay to someone and someone say, I think it's good, or I think it's bad, or I think it's okay, and that's not really constructive. So really think about who you're giving that essay to. And are they the type of person to rip it apart, right? There's editors out there who are looking for every single mistake out there. Or are they someone who's going to give you just kind of light feedback? Or is it someone who's going to really give you step-by-step feedback in a constructive way? If you have a writer in your circle of friends or family, that might be someone to kind of lean on. And there are professional essay readers out there. So really kind of look into who can give you constructive feedback. Now, what is constructive feedback? I think that's, kind of identifying some of those things that we talked about in our self-editing circles, but also saying like, look, the structure doesn't make sense. If you add up all the things in your essay, it doesn't add up to your conclusion, or this doesn't sound like you, or, the first half of the essay is great, the second half is not great. These are the things that you can do to fix that. So, these are the things that, you want to hear. Not that they're easy to hear, but these are things that, can give you pointers into the right direction. Also, when you're giving your essay to others to read, I think it would be great to give consideration points for feedback. So if you have differing levels of people who are reading your essay, so, I have friends who can read my essay, but I also have professional essay readers read my essay. I also have other writer people people who write for their, work, and I have them read my essay. And so if you have different levels of people who are reading your essay, I think it's good to give points of consideration. So if I'm giving my essay to a friend, I'm going to say, hey, does this sound like me? And can you understand the story on its own, right? A lot of people who have been in industry or who have worked for quite a few years, it's really easy to get into jargon. It's really easy to use industry terminology, and you give it to someone and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So really, on face value of that essay, have someone that can kind of point that out for you. And I would really, ask a friend, ask this group. You can reach out to people here and say, hey, like, what does this essay make sense if you just read it on its own? I think that's a great question to ask. Other questions to ask maybe to your editors is my why law school reasoning clear if you have it in your essay? Is it easy to understand, right? Is the tone appropriate? Is it stylistically appealing? Some stuff like that you can really ask questions for your editors. You can also ask very pointed questions like, do you think this story is necessary in my essay? Do you think I can do without it? Do you think my conclusion adds up, right? All these questions that you can ask, but you really want to gauge at what level of writing people are at, and what questions you want to give to what person. So really think about that before you give. It's really easy to say, hey, read my essay and send a mass email out to like 20 people. I don't know how helpful that is. So really, I would give some consideration for that. And find people who may not be familiar with the field you're in. So this kind of goes back to that jargon, but especially for those people who have worked or have been in industry or had careers, or kind of circle of familiarity may be the people you work with. And that can be a little bit problematic in that you guys are all familiar with your own jargon, right? So, there's acronyms and there's industry words that, people might not be aware of. And it's really easy in your group of people to understand that essay, but from a person who is not from that industry, who doesn't know what that entails, it can be confusing and it can really be a detriment to your essay. So find people who are not familiar with your work, not from your industry, to kind of read that essay for you. And then when you are giving out drafts of your essay, I'm a big fan of giving out PDF files because people can't edit it, and can give you more like feedback, not in like the editing template in Google Docs, because it can get really messy, and if you're kind of accepting changes or whatever, and you never know when one of their words is sneaking their way into your essay and all of that. So if you are looking to get pure like grammar edits, I think that's a different conversation. But if you're getting like, feel it, like, how does this essay feel? How does this essay sound kind of feedback? I would really give it out in PDF form and manage those drafts that you're editing. So that is really it in terms of my spiel for today. Any like questions there? Doesn't have to be about this. It can be about essays in general, before we dive into reading essays. Sounds like we're all good. Yeah.
I have some questions, but
Sure.
I'd rather do it after the essay reading because I wouldn't want to take from that kind of feedback because mine is not really as pointed.
Well, let me
as it
tell you.
would
So
be.
today we're really talking about this. So if you have questions, I would encourage you to ask them. And then we're only doing Clint's today, so I think we have a little bit more time.
Well, my questions were kind of more towards the subject matter in terms
Sure.
of like what I'm editing. So I've gone through a few different versions of mine, but each
Sure.
version kind of just seems like a regurgitation of my resume
Sure.
with an overwhelming or like a, a kind of theme of like, oh, that's why I want to go to law school. Like every time I mention something on my resume, I connect it to that's why I want to go to law school. And I
Mm,
know that's not what it's supposed to be at all because the resume is there for a reason.
yeah.
So I just kind of keep hitting that brick wall and I don't really know how to get out of it. And I want some kind of tips to kind of
Yeah,
avoid that if possible.
absolutely. I think so. Eva, if you can, I do encourage you to send in a draft, even if you think it's, it's not anywhere near a draft. I do encourage you to kind of send it in if you want here. And I think the second piece of that is we really want to anchor your essay on a narrative, right? So, for example, my essay. So I've had about a 6-year, 7-year career at this point, and I've had 3 different jobs. So in that, I know that I can't cover all 3 jobs in my essay. They're vastly different, and the kind of experience behind it is very, very different. So I can't cover all 3, and I've done multiple things in those jobs that I could pull out as my why law school. It's important to pick the right one, first off. But the second piece is, how do you frame that narrative, right? Is it a lesson learned? Is it a discovery of self? Is it a journey that you've been on? Is it goal setting? What is that driving factor behind there? And the reverse question to that is really, what do you want admissions to know about you? And that's different for every person, right? Some people it's, you can push your own goalposts. Some people it's you're very compassionate and you want to be an advocate for people. Some other people it's they want to be the first in an industry, right? There's different things that you want other the admissions to know about you. And I think that really speaks to the essence of who you are. So maybe start with that and think about, hey, like, what if I only had 3 minutes with admissions? What am I going to tell them about myself? And anchor that narrative around that concept. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I kind of find myself overwhelmed because I tried to do as much as I possibly could in terms of like interning, extracurriculars, sorority, exec council stuff. I try to do as much as I can. So now I'm trying to center myself on what actually shows myself in the best light. So
Okay,
I'm just kind of struggling through
sure.
picking something.
So if I asked you, what do you want admissions to know about you? What would your kind of first answers be? And it doesn't, you don't have to commit to any of this.
Um, I'm not sure that I'm adaptable, that I have a caring for I'm very caring of people around me and I want to help others. Anything that I've done, I've always done it with the kind of mindset of like, oh, I can help this person in this way, or oh, I can contribute to the community in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of community oriented. Like I joined my sorority because I found a community there and I knew that they would help the surrounding community and the Native Armenian community that I'm a part of, like in OC and back in Armenia. And then whenever I was doing my jobs, I was like, oh, I can help this attorney do whatever tasks they're doing, and then I can understand their area of law and kind of see, do I fit in this? And would I be able to do this as a career to help others when I eventually go to law school and be an attorney myself? So
Okay,
that's
so
the
I
kind of
hear
mindset
two
I
things.
have.
So I hear two things. First, you're talking about your community oriented, right? Your passion in helping others in your community. That's one.
Mhm.
And then the second piece about the work is, sorry, and I've written notes. Um, it's about kind of finding your space in which you think you can make an impact.
Mhm.
I think that's where you're going with those two things. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. So I think eventually this is going to split off into 2 essays, but don't fear. If you can find a narrative in your experience, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to cover multiple years or multiple jobs. It can be just one job or one day in a job, right? Or, whatever. But what shows that you are community oriented? Is it that you feel a deep cultural connection? Is it that you feel a deep connection to the people that you live with who are in your vicinity? You know, when you talk about community, that means so many different things. So I really want you to dig deep into what specifically you're talking about. And tell me a story about how you have been a service to that particular community that you're talking about. And that doesn't mean you're only committed to that community. It shows us that not only do you care, but also you can act on that care, right? You can act on it and take action. So really, it doesn't really matter what the topic in terms of what has happened is. It is that you want to make sure that you can show that you are able to act on what you believe in. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Okay. And then on the other piece of that, the second half of the things that you talked about is, you know, finding your space where you think you can be a net positive or be an impact. I think that's also something that needs to be fleshed out with a narrative of, maybe a moment in your job where you're like, you found your niche, you found this moment where you're like, hey, I know exactly what to do. And I know I can be of help, and kind of really hone into that mindset and say, these are the things that led me to that realization. And then kind of what was done after that. So kind of the before and after of that would be really interesting for you to, I think would be interesting for you to talk about. Is that, okay. I hope you're not overwhelmed.
No, that helps a lot. That helps give me some kind of direction on how to look at my past experiences. So thank you so much for the tips and input. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think as you start writing that narrative, you might be like, actually, I might need to, change it a little bit, and don't be scared of change. Really kind of go with the flow on it. But I think it would be good to start with those two. And even if it's like a half draft, turn it in, we'll work on it, we'll workshop it. So we're here to help.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. And Clint, before we get to your essay, I do see a question from Sam. Is it worth saying I'm the first fellow? Paragraph where I'm trying to give examples of my actions. I don't know if it's worth just it's first without feeling like I'm bragging. Here I say brag all you want in your essay. I think it's a moment for you to flex. So I think a lot of times we are kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should brag. I say brag, flex, show us what you got, because it's your moment. So I think it's okay. Alrighty. So Clint, let's go into your essay. I know we've been working on it for quite some time. Let me see if I can get to it. Oh no, okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. I have shared. Can we all see that? All right. And I will, again, read out the essay and then we'll give some feedback. Yeah. When deciding upon a career path, I have often found that people tend to follow a parental guidance of influence. When discussing the topic with friends, acquaintances, etc., the typical answer is, my father is a doctor, so I wanted to go into the medical field. Or when it pertains to becoming a lawyer, the answer usually circles back to, I have a long list of family members that have worked in the legal field. But what happens when your father is part of an Italian-American crime family? While the idealistic American parent came home after 5 p.m., how can you explain that your father might not be coming back? Are you to answer truthfully, hoping the reaction of your peers is not of judgment, but of understanding? Answers and questions swirl in my head as I grasp for a sense of escape. The question always loomed: what will my future hold? Are you to follow the footsteps of what your father walked into, a life where the stories shared aren't of the usual family conversation, rather vile topics of your father and grandfather going into the same social club as John Gotti, or hearing about a man who is an expert at getting rid of a body? While the movies glamorize this lifestyle, it all comes crashing down and families are left trying to piece together an impossible life puzzle. And so with someone of my background, why do I want to attend law school? The answer is becoming a lawyer was the faintest of ideas. I did not come from a family of law, nor did I envision becoming a lawyer from a young age. In fact, it was the criminal justice field that I was motivated to join at first. Contrary to belief, seeing the FBI agents from a young age made me believe that I could make a difference through becoming a police officer. In doing so, by arresting criminals, I would thus be helping the families that are often the unseen victims. I believe in this ideology, and I yearned for the day of acceptance. That moment finally came in the form of an envelope I received, an offer from the New York City Police Department for admits to the police academy. Upon hearing the news, I informed my supervisor, who has turned into a mentor. As I sat down to discuss the news with her, she asked me a question that prior to the encounter, I had not fathomed myself. Is the career path I have chosen one picked by genuine desire or a sense of validation? She asked me to reflect on this career path before I decide to make a decision. I spent the next few weeks contemplating this question, and the resounding feeling was that of relief. My entire life up until this point has been one to conceal my identity. Even prior to my birth, my father was adamant on my first name being as American sounding as possible. This ironic sense that a name could change the circumstances surrounding my family background. And yet it didn't stop me from one afternoon of moving boxes in the attic to the discovery of firearms hidden in the corner, or to the discovery of a family member causing an accidental fire to a pizza store, and even to the personal annotation of being called a mafia kid during an internship. However, the true realization was that of a simple picture. It was that of a mugshot taken of my father. While the kid who looked at the same photo years ago vowed to prove himself, I now came to a more peaceful resolution. While I will always love my family and father, I was ready to come to terms with the portion of my life and move on. Upon coming back to my mentor and discussing my decision, she directed me to the opportunities that law school holds for me. I have been told by numerous people that while I am a leader, my true power comes from my ability to be compassionate. Even my own family members have continually told me that I always look at the good in people, and that is my desire with my goal of becoming a lawyer. I want to enter the practice of family court or defense law to understand those who unequivocally are going through the hardest parts of their lives. I want to be part of the person that can help guide and get someone back on their feet, because had it not been for a few important people, I might have not gotten up. The name Corso in Italian means course, and I believe that it symbolizes the course that I have decided to take, free of a need to validate myself or take an action to satisfy another. While I cannot control the life I was born into, I could decide the path I took, and I'm ready for the journey. All right. Any feedback from the group here in the chat, or if you want to come off mute? Yeah, I agree, Sam. I like the conclusion. And it's kind of this like tie it together with the family moment. So I do like it. Any other comments? Cool. So Clint, thank you for sending it in. I know we've been working on this for quite some time. So I love this moment with your mentor and kind of this journey of like internal discovery. So I think you did a great job there. And kind of laying out the land for where you're coming from. And I think for you in particular, this story, it's kind of I don't want to say an anomaly, but the story behind your family matters. So I'm okay with kind of the setup. A lot of times we say don't cross generations with your essay because it gets too broad. But with yours, because the family story is so important, I'm okay with it. I think when in the very beginning, when we talked about your essay and the topic and all of that, I believe we talked about kind of your mom not getting a lot of legal help, and kind of that also being a trigger for you to pursue this particular type of law, which was, I believe, I'm sorry, I kind of lost it, family court or defense law. And I think that's kind of where you came up with that why for that particular piece of law. And I noticed you dropped it. I'm wondering whether you're going to address that in a different essay, or you can drop it altogether just because of length.
I don't know, with a diversity letter, I know you mentioned that I could also write one of that nature. Then maybe I would probably mention more of that.
Sure.
That kind of applies, I guess, more to the unique position of, I guess, one possible avenue. Like with my mom, obviously, everyone, it's very quick to be for like kind of like in my situation or family situation, it's very quick to be arrested, for racketeering, whatever. But if someone, is trying to get alimony money, or, if it's unfortunately a female in the court system, they're unequivocally treated differently or perceived, looked down upon than if I was kind of a male trying to, obtain money from somebody. So I guess I felt like I could use that in a diversity statement, but I thought it was more important to, I thought it just didn't, I thought it didn't add up, mentioning kind of the whole background and then flipping it script to one factor with my mom. It just, I did write it in there once, but it just didn't flow well.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I'm glad to know that it's going to show up somewhere else. I think that was that was a good story, and I'm like, oh, I can see it working here, but if you're going to put it somewhere else, I think that's fine. I think what really needs to get cleaned up here, and really, I think the core of the story is fine. You're talking about a personal journey in terms of discovering, like why you're pursuing a particular career, and this moment of, this come to Jesus moment of like, hey, that's really, I might not be pursuing this particular career for the right reasons. So you're making the shift. And I think that's fine. What really should get cleaned up is this first paragraph, because it's getting a little bit too general. It's weird because it's not really general, but it's a personal dilemma that's being spoken in a general way. What I mean is, this is your internal dialogue. This is your internal monologue of, oh my gosh, these things are happening. This is my family situation, but you're putting it in terms of like, those of you who want to be a doctor, you're pursuing it because, the family has been in the medical field, or, you come from a long line of lawyers, stuff like that. I think, to be honest, that could get dropped, in that it's kind of taking away, when you read the essay as a whole, it's taking away from your family background as a whole.
I actually wanted to quickly ask. Yeah, I did kind of get that sense, that it kind of just took up a lot there. And I wanted to get something in first, because I know you said it's easier to get something in than kind of, get the foundation for the house and then paint the house. So I was wondering about kind of the mention of the attic, that I mentioned down below. That was really like the first time, I went up to move boxes for, get Christmas ornaments, and a big thud happens. And, I was little and I was curious, so I opened it, and it's a bunch of, firearms. So I didn't know if that should be, I should bring that up top, or just kind of get rid of the whole question marks and, start. I don't know if you thought I could start with, but what happened, I'll rework it obviously, but kind of the mention of that thrown in there, or no, just kind of work with what I had, I guess, in the first.
I actually like that idea. And I was kind of thinking about whether the structure would work. But this moment of like, in your childhood, you're kind of faced with the realities of your family, with that thing, that story in the attic, right? And I think it really doesn't need to be more than what you've already told here. Like there's no need to kind of expand on that story. But I think if you pull that forward and say that episode right here, say this line, and then do something like, that was the first time I was faced with the realities of my family business, and kind of cut this piece out because I feel like it's not doing too much for you at this point in your essay. But then start with, I know you have it in question form and you've taken away the question marks, but it's still in the question form. So really put it in a format of, that story with the attic, the moment that you were faced with your family business, and then say, it was hard for you to come, something along the lines of hard for you to come to terms with, what your family was doing. And then, although you were trying to get acceptance or understanding, but you were faced with a lot of judgment. I think that would kind of wrap up that piece of that story very well. And it would give us a lot of background on, who your family is, which you can't choose. And then the kind of hardships as a child and as you were growing up, you had, which was not of understanding, a lot of judgment, and, kind of not great things. Right. So kind of that setup, I think, would work better here in this first paragraph. The essence is there. I think we just need to rework the words.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that the attic story would be just talking with other people who are, who went through the same thing, parents, not parents, but fathers in this life. There's always kind of that one moment where you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense.
You're confronted with that, right? Yeah. So kind of, I think that would be a great moment to start your essay in, where you're confronted with that, because then again, it echoes that second confrontation with your mentor about your career choice, and her saying, is this really what you want, or are you wanting it for a different reason? And in that moment, you're saying, hey, actually, I need to do something for myself. So I think that's a great echo in your essay. If you can start with a confrontation of like something that you can't choose and something that you're not, it wasn't a option for you. And then you're confronted with something where you have options, right? So I think that's a great echo.
Okay, yeah, I kind of, when I was reading, I did read this like a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And just reading the first paragraph, while I took out the question marks, it is still obviously in question format. So I think I can still obtain, my whole purpose is like growing up, like everyone, everyone would talk about what their dads did or whatever, or they, obviously show up for baseball games or whatever. And I really couldn't really say why my dad wasn't there, or what my, what my dad did, obviously, or what my grandfather did, or what one of my, cousins did. Couldn't really go into it much. So I was trying to say, how do you say, or answer that question? Because then usually when I, obviously, like even at my work now, I don't really talk about my family history or anything, but it's always asked of like, why do you want to go into the law field? And so that's what I was trying to obtain, but I think I can do that with the attic story, and that'll play.
And Sam has a great point in the chat here, where he's asking, how did it make you feel when you were called the mafia kid, or finding out about your family? I think it's implied at this point, but it's not directly mentioned. And this is a personal preference, so if you're like, you're fine with this, that's fine. But I say be more direct than implications, because you don't want, like there's only so many people who will come to the same conclusion as you, or me, and other people might misunderstand it or kind of take it in a different way. So I say be direct and kind of tell us how you're feeling, how you felt in that moment. What was the internal feelings that were going on?
Okay, yeah, I tried to do that with the second portion of it, and I definitely will mention it. I know we mentioned the first part. I didn't want, or actually a while ago, we mentioned how I didn't want it to be misperceived as I was, thinking about going into this life or following this footsteps.
No.
So I'll definitely try to clean that up and be more concrete, I guess. But I think the realization, especially with like the mugshot photo and everything, and just other family members too, kind of, um, what do you do when a parent who's supposed to be Superman, ends up doing stuff that's not really, so to speak, Superman personality, I guess,
Sure.
material.
Sure. And I think, and this kind of goes to the broad backgrounds that people are coming from, in that like the father figure may not be the same implication across cultures, across peoples. So if you're saying, hey, like, your father figure is supposed to be someone that you can look up to, that you can respect, I think that's something that's worth putting in your essay. Because some cultures, it's the maternal side that has that leadership position in a family. So I would really call that out and say, hey, like, I thought that father figures were always someone who I could look up to and I could respect and is a respectable person. But that wasn't true in my life, right? Like, that makes it very concrete as to where that family history is letting you down, right? So I think that would be a good call out.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely try to play it in with I mean, obviously when I found out, it's like, or found that in the attic, that was kind of the first kind of where, my mom had to tell me what really was, going on. And
Sure.
obviously she wasn't so proud of, or knew at the time as well. So it was kind of like a heavy kind of, kind of made your heart kind of drop a little bit. So
Yeah.
I'll try to add that in a little bit as well.
Yeah. And I know we're kind of going backwards in this class, but Sam, I know you asked this question about like this why law school thing happening, and where it happens. So for a fact, it happens here in that, like, goal of becoming a lawyer. However, the seeds of that piece right there is coming in for Clint way earlier in his essay, right? It's coming in somewhere around, where was it? Where it said, the possibilities of law school right here, but also kind of this seed of whether it's the right decision to go into that particular field. So I think, Clint, you do a great job of saying, hey, like, this is where it's leading. Yeah. And I'm glad you saw that, Sam. This is where that essay is going. So it's not really explicitly talking about why law school for three paragraphs. It's kind of laying down that path and saying, hey, like, this is clearly the decision that I've made and the logical decision to make here, right? So it's kind of leading us down that path. So I think that's kind of what I'm talking about when we're talking about, does your law school take up a lot of space in your essay? It doesn't necessarily have to be 3 paragraphs of talking about exactly why. So I think you did a great job there, Clint. Do you have any questions, Clint, about your essay?
No, surprisingly, I guess it went better than I thought it was. No, I just, for the last paragraph, I thought that was kind of important.
Yeah,
I guess
I
that's
do
kind
like
of,
it.
I didn't want it to be too corny, but I guess catchy enough where, it's like, ends well, right? Because
Yeah.
most of the story is pretty not well. I no, I was concerned that people would get confused. I kind of was saying that, with the attic story in the beginning, and then kind of um just the feeling, when obviously when my father was arrested, FBI agents came in and, they're,
Sure.
there and then gone once, in 1 second. Just when looking at the mugshot, I just felt like, and obviously it doesn't excuse his actions, but you just kind of get a very feeling of kind of shame, for what a family member does, even if it's not you. And that's kind of what the FBI kind of made me feel like. So that's why I wanted to, I looked at that mugshot way back years ago, and I kind of wanted to, I guess become a cop to arrest people like, who did that basically. And it was almost a sense of proving myself. And I just, when looking back on it now, it's kind of just an acceptance of that's just part of my family history. And, I'm kind of not really ashamed of it, nor, just kind of accepting of it and kind of ready to move on, I guess, from it.
Sure.
So I didn't know if it was misread or misinterpreted at all, but I guess not. So that's good.
Well, okay, so I think you gave a lot of background to where that mugshot is coming from, and then you're talking about here in your essay, like what that mugshot means to you now as an adult. And I think we don't need the background because we all know what a mugshot is, and clearly at some point in your life, your father has been arrested and has taken a mugshot. So that to me is not a point of question. What is more kind of, I'm like, oh, can we dig deeper, is really this vow to prove himself like moment as you look back on your childhood. And when you say peaceful resolution, what does that mean?
Yeah, I was trying to look for and I'll have to think of a word. Not really peaceful. I guess that kind of just sounds like a little bit odd there. Kind of just
Yeah.
more like a resounding, I guess, moment. More of just a moment of like not filled with anger, not filled with regret, just kind of, resounding of that's just how what it is, or that's just a portion, but not really like saying, oh, because of this I have to do this. Kind of, it is what it is, but it doesn't kind of define me. So I guess peaceful is the wrong word to use there.
Well, I mean, beyond the word, I think we're talking about a moment where you're like the past is there and you're kind of accepting of it, but also you don't want to be, as far as what I can tell, you don't want your career to be tied to that, right? You don't want your career to say, like, because of this happening, I am doing this. Rather, you're saying, hey, like, I want to choose a career for myself that you can be proud of. So I think that explanation is a little bit missing here, in that you're saying, like, look, you've taken a look at that photo years later as an adult, and you accept the past as a past, but then you want to move forward from it and claim your future rather than be tied to the past, is what I'm hearing. So tell me if that's wrong.
Yes.
But,
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah.
so I think that's something that I had to infer and listen to you to understand why that mugshot is so significant to you as an adult. So really, I think it would do you well to expand on that on a little bit,
Okay.
and kind of clue us into this move away from your past or your family's past.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I think I can do that.
And I think really I think you can expand on that a little bit. I wouldn't think about the word limit or anything at this point.
Okay.
Because I think there's a couple things that need to get cleaned up in terms of phrasing. There's a little bit like colloquial, there's also grammar mistakes. So that's something that we can work on as the content, I think, needs one more look at before we can get into kind of the grammar stuff.
Yeah, no, I definitely, yeah, I'll try to get through some of the grammatical. I just kind of was writing to write, so
Yeah.
I'll definitely look for the grammatical. I know I even reading this again, I kind of picked up on a few just kind of silly mistakes. So I'll definitely try to clean that up. And
But don't worry about that yet. Really look at the content and the things that we talked about, right? Bring that story forward, clean this up, and then this last third of your essay here, that mugshot conversation, I think that would be a good place to add a little bit more context.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty good. I just didn't want to send in something that was too rough draft, but something that I kind of listened to your advice on. So
Yeah.
I think that was the goal of, I'll definitely clean up that portion of it, but
Yeah.
kind of the whole portion is that like, or the goal, the message is that basically like, some of my grandfather's passed, but family members, there's no getting out of that life for them. That's it for them. But the whole point for me was kind of just to say that, went from literally going to college, masters, whatever, in the criminal justice field to, wanted to become detective, police officer, whatever,
Yeah.
to kind of realizing that it's all kind of done out of this, pre kind of decision to kind of just prove to people who would always assume that I would be one person. And
Sure.
I kind of came to the realization that I really could do something just for me. And, I don't have to kind of, so to speak, be on like, one side or the other. I could just do something for me, and that can be for me. So that was kind of the goal. So I'm happy at least that came through.
Okay.
And I'll just kind of clear up that.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.